Well, good evening. I'm Mark Tierney. I'm Welsh Labour's candidate for the general election on December the 12th, and I'd just like to start this evening by thanking Friends of the Earth Pembrokeshire and XR for putting on an event with so many of you listening to us this evening. I'll start this evening just by telling you very quickly a little bit about myself. I'm a 39-year-old father of three. I live in the village of Efalwen in rural West Carmarthenshire, and I moved back to this area after I studied in the west of England and had some work there to get a job here, and I've started my family and I've lived here ever since. And like most people my age, I've had several jobs in this Pembrokeshire economy, an economy that just kind of potters along, supported by the public sector, and seasonal jobs in agriculture and in tourism. Now, beyond being a dad and a partner and a volunteer and a worker, I'm also a campaigner and someone who rolls his sleeves up to make things happen. You need ideas and creativity to benefit others, and I think I've got that in spades. In the face of a climate emergency, we'll need somebody like that as well. I've helped to establish plastic-free Narberth, I've backed plastic-free Larne all of the way, and I've involved myself in community energy projects, beach cleans, and speaking up for policies that can create a cleaner, greener world. For my whole entire life, people have been talking about going green, the ozone layer, recycling, carbon emissions, pollution, climate change, and now the climate emergency. Well, the time for talking is done. The time for action is now. The next UK government will have to be more ambitious, more prepared, and more ready to take the serious steps that we need to stop global temperatures rising, further habitats being lost, and the irreversible damage to our climate that threatens not just our way of life, but our very existence. We cannot risk any more delay. We cannot risk ignoring the facts. The Labour Party, with the support of the Greens in this constituency, has a manifesto that puts forward an ambitious new Green Deal, a revolution to sustain our economy and well-being, but one which tackles the emergency we now find ourselves in. As your MP, I will champion my party's manifesto for real change and be the climate change champion this constituency needs in Parliament. Thank you.
It's an honour to come and speak to you tonight. My name is Dr Rhys Thomas. I'm the Plaid Cymru candidate for Carmarthenshire West and South Pems. A little bit about myself. I've done quite a lot, actually. I've lived several lives, as somebody said, and I've probably died a few as well. My background, I was a doctor and then I joined the military. I did 13 operational tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, all the lovely places all around the world. So I've seen the harsh end of, and I've seen man's inhumanity to man. But I'm also a doctor, so I was able to treat both sides of the war as well. But my passion has been always to... In Afghanistan, I saw so much cruelty in Afghanistan, and we had to learn some horrible lessons in Afghanistan. Nothing good ever comes from war, except for one thing I always say, which is medicine. But I learned to be an incredibly better doctor. Actually, we learned so much in the war in Afghanistan. Actually, we drove medicine forward. And with the new resuscitation I brought up, I came back. I then decided to come back to Wales. And the reason I came back to Wales was because my mum phoned me up one morning and said, "Rhys, I'm retiring, I've got to sell the farm." And I went, "Oh my God, right, my days of adventure are over, I'm coming home." And life changed for me then as well, because I saw how the Welsh NHS was suffering, and I saw how all the advances we'd done in Afghanistan were going to be forgotten. So I was determined then to create the world's best pre-hospital critical care service in Wales. So I came back and I set up and founded the new Wales Air Ambulance Service. And it was purely because of the drive I had from all those soldiers that had died in Afghanistan. I wanted to make sure that their death was not in vain, that I created the Wales Air Ambulance Service. And I thought that was it for me. I thought that was it. I was going to sit back, rest of my laurels, put my feet up and enjoy the rest of my life. But I couldn't, because I'm passionate about Wales at the end of the day. I'm passionate about my country, and I'm passionate about my friends and my family, and I want to make sure that my children grow up the best they can possibly be. I want them to have something when I hand over my life onto them, right? And I'm really worried at the moment that they're not going to have something. So I am passionate about the environment, and because I want to be able to give them something. We are faced with an incredible challenge at this moment. And it was interesting you were saying about risk. I've balanced risk my whole life. Whether I was in the army, jumping out of a plane into enemy territory, or actually as a doctor, balance the risks against the benefits of doing something for somebody and hopefully saving their life. So I'm well versed at risk. But this is something we all have to pitch in together. We know poverty in Wales. 200,000 of our children are living in poverty in Wales. Okay, right? We have to stop that. There's nothing worse than poverty but the poverty of ambition. And that's what we have to do. Plaid Cymru's policy and manifesto, please read it, okay? I believe it's the greenest policy out there, right? We're proposing, just like New Zealand have, that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Single-use plastics we're rid of by 2030 as well. I suggest we should go further. I would like to ban fossil-fueled cars by 2025, like the Scandinavian countries have done as well. We've got to remember, transportation and oil is the cause of problems.
Keep some of the good bits for later.
Okay, right. But anyway, you've had a taste of me tonight. Thank you very much. But concert tonight, I am going to sign the climate change pledge because I do believe firmly in that. Anyway.
Good evening, everybody. I'm learning Welsh at the moment. Dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg, but I'm going to speak in English this evening. So on to dwi'n siarad yn Saesneg heno. I'm Alistair Cameron from the Liberal Democrats. A little bit about my background. I grew up in Bigeli in South Pembrokeshire, went to local schools in the area, eventually went to Greenhill School in Tenby. Like some of the other candidates, moved away from the area, did various jobs during that period. Now I live in Pleasant Valley, in Stepaside in South Pembrokeshire, but I still work part-time in Hereford in England, where I teach English really in a further education college to children who didn't quite pass their GCSE English and trying to get them through it at the moment. Said I went to school at Greenhill and Tenby, and one of my maths teachers here today, so sitting at the back keeping an eye on me, so it's nice to see you again, Philip. But the Liberal Democrats, as you know, we're very much a Remain party. I'm going to talk about Brexit first of all, because the reason we're so strongly a Remain party is we support the original objectives in which the common market was first set up. It was set up after a period of war in Europe to establish peace in Europe, peace through trade. And we think those original values, ideals that it was set upon still hold very good today. Not just that, we think that countries need to work together to solve common problems. And if we think about the climate emergency, we're only going to find a solution to that by different countries working together. And what better way to do it than in the European Union as an institution? Dealing with the question of the climate emergency, our target is to reduce the greenhouse gases in the UK by 2045 at the absolute latest. Now that is, some people might think there should be a more ambitious target, but I think that is an ambitious target. And I would also say to achieve that, what we will embark immediately on is a 10-year emergency programme in order to get the fundamentals right and to deal with it. And then once we've dealt with that, we'll deal with the harder to deal with sectors a little bit later, so that we get to be in carbon neutral at the very latest by 2045. Now to do that, first of all, we will insulate all of Britain's homes by 2030. Not only will that cut down on our carbon emissions, but it will tackle the problem of fuel poverty as well. We will ensure also that 80% of all of Britain's electricity is generated from renewables by 2030. And for instance, as part of that, I support this Swansea lagoon, which I think is very important. We will plant 60 million trees a year. That is an extremely ambitious target. I know people who work in that sector and say it's very difficult, but that is what we're pledging to do. And we will invest in public transport as well. And for instance, we support electrifying the railways. An obvious one for that is obviously the Swansea to Cardiff railway, but other ones as well. And we'll ensure that all new cars are electric by 2030. I'm just going to leave it there. I know we'll perhaps talk in a little bit more detail about the precise proposals. Thank you very much. Drop the bell.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Thank you, as other panellists have said, for coming out tonight. I know it's a busy time of year, so the fact that you're giving us your time, I know is appreciated by all of us. My name's Simon Hart. I have been, until 4 weeks ago, the MP for Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire since 2010. Before that, I started my professional career down the road in Carmarthen as a boring old chartered surveyor, but actually we did a lot around land use and forestry, where I sort of had an interest in our local environment, really started to germinate. I come from a farming background. My uncle was a dairy farmer, my father was a dairy farmer, my brother-in-law was until recently a dairy farmer, and I've always taken the view that actually our local environment is as it is because of farmers, not despite farmers. And I think sometimes we think two things are mutually exclusive, but I think absolutely the opposite. I have two kids. One is 19 and my daughter is 17. And I think I want to try and be positive tonight. One of the things I've really noticed in 2010, when I first stood in front of audiences like this at Hustings, the subject of the environment, whether it was on a global level or national level, rarely came up. Was rarely discussed. And in 2015, it was just beginning to germinate a little bit, and there was the beginnings of some sort of really rather louder movements and calls for action. By 2017, all of that had changed. By 2019, where we are now, that has gone through the roof. So when it used to just be about housing, health, schools, and the economy, still crucial issues in deciding any election, actually up on the inside has come the climate emergency, climate change, and indeed a lot of local issues. At a recent Hustings, we were talking about showing our respect to Welsh Government for being the sort of leader in the movement to ban single-use plastics in the form of plastic bags in supermarkets. Everybody said it wouldn't work, the supermarket didn't like it, but guess what, it worked. Not only worked, it worked at a really tight timescale too. So actually, my point is this: if we are to be successful in our objectives, either globally or locally, we have to cooperate as political bodies. Whoever is in government after next Thursday, whatever it is, will only succeed so long as we cooperate with other parties, other governments, other countries. If we try and go it alone, if we try and do this on the basis of political divide and 2-point scoring, we will not succeed. And I've got a long list, just as we all have, of things which have been achieved over recently. By the way, just on Swansea Bay title again, I absolutely agree with that. I remember I led the debate in Parliament on this issue, and I got to my feet to start the debate at 2:45 in the morning. Would you believe it? Full house of Welsh MPs, anyway, 40 million. I mean, what a nightmare. Anyway, I won't bore you with all of the stats now, because actually I think we will have a question. There's some really good stuff going on, and it would be such a shame to spoil the progress that we are making, which of course we could do better and faster by forming sort of invisible party political divides, whoever's in government. So, my pledge to you tonight is whether in opposition or in government, we will work together to try and keep the pace and the momentum up.
To reduce the likelihood of Johnson being returned to power with his declaration of delivering Brexit, tactical voting is taking place in many constituencies across the UK in order to remove the threat of the Tory MP. What does each candidate think about tactical voting in this constituency?
Yes, I mean, I'm sure you know there has been the Remain alliance in some areas of Wales and some areas of the United Kingdom. I mean, Wales, this has been a cooperation really in favour of Remain and staying in the European Union between the Green Party, the Plaid Cymru and obviously ourselves, the Liberal Democrats. And this has resulted in some candidates standing aside in some seats, and in Carmarthenshire, the other two Carmarthenshire seats, the Liberal Democrats has stood aside in those elections, in order to secure a victory for a Remain candidate. As I understand, and somebody may contradict me, by all means, if I think I've got this wrong, but as I understand, the Labour Party were also invited to join that Remain alliance, but decided not to do so, and therefore are standing candidates in every constituency in, in Britain, whatever prospects they have. I mean, on the question of tactical voting, I suppose all I can say is I'm standing in front of you as a Liberal Democrat candidate, somebody who believes passionately in Liberal Democrat values. They're different to the values of the Labour Party, Plaid Cymru, Conservatives. There are principles. Above all, I think we've got a fair, sensible programme to reinvest money back in public services, a practical programme to deal with the climate crisis. We're not trying to say we're going to spend everything and forget about, how that's going to affect our debt, our financial position in the future. I think it's a very responsible, well thought out programme that various bodies like the Institute of Financial Studies have said that said they think it is a practical, sensible programme. So I'm standing on that programme, and all I would say is, if you believe in Liberal Democrat values, please vote Liberal Democrat.
Thank you very much indeed. Simon.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that having been in a coalition and in a confidence and supply arrangement, I think sometimes when Parliament, whether it's in Westminster or in Cardiff, ends up sort of trying to second-guess voters and make sort of casual or formal arrangements, it, as we've discovered, doesn't always work as well as it would seem to on paper. And that's just right. Voting is about values. It's not always about agreeing with every single line and letter of a manifesto or every single sentence uttered by a leader or a spokesman. It's about what feels right and the direction you're trying to sort of a party or a potential government is trying to go in. And so I completely understand how it happens, and it's great that in our democracy people can vote how they want, in whatever form they want, whether they can not vote and it doesn't matter. They can express, we can express our opinion in 1,000 different ways. That is a fantastic privilege to have. But I just hope in the end that I've always just voted for the person, and mainly the person I've liked the most and who's the closest fit to my own particular values. And I'm not going to sort of vote for him in order to keep him out, or him because I actually want him after all, or his brother-in-law and some other. That all gets a bit complicated for me. If I like him, I vote for him.
Thank you very much. Mark.
Well, I think this election, unlike many other elections, is one that people are talking about as being fundamentally important to the future of this country, not just in terms of the next 5 years, but in terms of the next generation, particularly because of climate change, but also because of where we're headed in terms of Brexit. Tactical voting, while it's something I'm not fully supportive of, I think in certain scenarios where our voting system doesn't allow proportional representation, in order to effect some sort of change, it may be the only direct course of action for people in certain constituencies across this country. And I don't think we should be pouring scorn on voters for voting tactically when some political parties have carved up their own deals in order to secure victory for certain numbers and a certain arithmetic in Parliament once the election is done and dusted on the 12th of December. Now, it's the Brexit Party's choice to stand down in this constituency. It was the Liberal Democrats' choice to stand down in Carmarthen East. But because Plaid and the Liberal Democrats thought they were both in with a crack in Ceredigion, they're slugging it out till the last minute. And, there's that kind of, that's a cynical ploy by the political parties. And Labour is the biggest political movement in this country. It's right that we should stand, Alistair, in every seat, that we can fund a candidate in, because we are representative of a large number of people in this country. And in this constituency, yes, I am pleased to have the support of Best for Britain, and I'm pleased to have the support for Wales for Europe in backing me to be the tactical choice to stop Brexit in this constituency. I can't be sorry about that. It's a statement of fact in this constituency. If people choose to accept that advice, then I'm very grateful.
I'm really glad we brought this subject up, actually, because it was Adam Price that started this conversation about tactical voting. And it came from an interesting situation, really, because he actually was he was thinking above the party. He was thinking about the country and not the party. And then he started the discussion of the Liberal Democrats and Green. And obviously, we've got to remember, it's us three are the only remaining parties in the country. I don't care what they say about Labour. Labour have not got a policy for Brexit. They actually haven't got a policy for Brexit, let alone Remain. The Conservatives are the party of Brexit. And we started that conversation for Brecon, right? And because we had that conversation for Brecon, Brecon was won by the Liberal Democrats. Not by Plaid Cymru, by the Liberal Democrats, right? We gave up that fight, okay? But it's more than that. This is about the age of the dinosaurs, as I call it, okay? The old party system is dead and dying, right? It's not about red or blue anymore, right? I talk about the 4 golden circles, right? It's about the environment's the first biggest thing, and within that golden circle is the community, is the economy, and it's health. And that's what we're about now, right? We're not about Labour values or Conservative values anymore. It doesn't fit our new age. But mostly, it's about us. It's about the people and it's about the constituents and not the party. The old parties have forgotten that. And if Simon likes to tell me that he would actually go against the whip in the Conservative Party, I'd really love to see that, because I don't think you would. And neither would Mark with the Labour Party as well.
Well, I've done so. I've done so.
Should we talk about the environmental record? That'd be a little bit. Right, thank you.
I'm really frustrated. I'm a passionate European. I voted Remain. I've been on 3 marches. As far as I can see, there's 3 candidates here who are Remain parties, and they're liable to split the vote between them. In the 2017 elections, the Conservatives had just under 47%, Labour had nearly 40%, Plaid had 9.3% and the Lib Dems 2.2%. It's going to split the vote, and we'll end up with a Tory going back to Westminster and voting with the government, and we'll leave Europe. And I think we've got such an opportunity. This is the one election that we have to forget our parties and vote for the country. Just this one. Next time, do what you want. But let's get the Tories out.
So what are the biggest steps that you've taken personally to reduce your carbon footprint?
So can I ask you to use the mic just because it carries better for the camera at the back.
Does that work a bit better? I just wanted to say one thing in relation to the ladies' question.
Sorry.
Oh, can I go to answer this one?
We'll try to think about later.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. I wish I'd been asked this question about a month ago, because I went from a normal diesel car to a hybrid. But unfortunately I had such trouble with the hybrid that I've actually traded it back in for a diesel car, so I sort of apologise for that. But I was it was, what was the question?
You should have gone electric.
I should have gone electric, and it raised quite an interesting point actually about charging points in rural areas, and I think it's a big deal. But anyway, that's it. So I tried to make a bit of a rather feeble effort in that regard, which I suspect won't be enough to satisfy 1 or 2 people. But I tell you what I have done, and this is if I turn the clock back 10 years, as I've said, used this cliche before, look at my behaviour then, look at my behaviour now, look at my behaviour hopefully in 10 years hence. And I think things which I used to do or used to probably ignore around packaging, around use of plastics, around unnecessary journeys, around the things I would do in my own garden in terms of sort of planting and composting, that sort of stuff. I probably didn't pay much attention to that. I will hold both my hands up and admit that to you now. Mainly thanks actually to the influence of my children, I now make a very special effort in all of those areas. And I think in 10 years' time, some of the stuff which I took for granted when I was a kid, we will look at in abject horror and wonder why we ever allowed it. So, yeah, have I done a single thing which has made a massive difference? No, I'm probably as hypocritical as a lot of other people. I think a good game, but I don't always play a good game. But I do think sort of in evolutionary terms, I have made some progress. And guess what? Actually, it's fine. I've woken up the next morning and everything's been all right.
Okay, thank you very much. Department and Mark, thank you.
Well, I suppose all of it is about taking those little steps, isn't it? And changing our habits, because that's the biggest issue affecting all of us. We have a very convenient lifestyle, we have a very convenient way of going about our daily business, and we're usually working to somebody else's timeline on that, so it's whether or not we have to get into work for a certain time, or whether or not we have to buy produce in a particular way. I think in terms of myself, we've switched to a green energy provider at home. We've made those sorts of very simple changes that we can do. If I could afford to change my car at the moment, I'd certainly be looking at an electric vehicle, and I'm pleased that Labour's policy is to introduce a 0% APR on transitioning and helping people to transition over to electric vehicles, because people do need that incentive, they do need that push to make a change. But I have been instrumental in helping set up things like plastic-free Narberth, so encouraging other people to get involved in the green agenda and sharing the message that way. And in terms of changing my own habits, encouraging my children to think more about the environment as well. Now, they're very good at doing it themselves. They're the ones who come home and tell me about what I should be doing. But, you know, we have to cut down on the amount of packaging that we use. We have to think more carefully about the journeys that we take, which I try to do now, and I would use the railways more if only they took me to work and brought me home at a time that was actually sensible and convenient for most people in a working pattern. So there are things that I can do, there are things that I can do, but there are more things that I would like to do, and we need a government in our favour working on those to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the single biggest change I ever did is I bought my own smart meter off Amazon 7 years ago. Instantaneously, I dropped the amount of electricity I use for the house 50% overnight. But not just that, I've got solar PV, I've got solar thermal, and they work really nicely in combination with each other. Solar thermal is the best way to heat your water, even in winter in Wales, believe it or not. It's amazing. I tell you now, right? I haven't used a thermostat in my hot water since I bought it 6 years ago, right? Do the change, okay? Solar PV, no-brainer. Reduces the amount of electricity you use for your house, no matter what size of your house, by 30% by just having it, right? Okay, the government's taken a grant from it now, which is stupid, and now you have to pay tax for the solar panels now as well, which is nuts. How are you going to incentivize people to go to that when you're actually trying to put a foot brake on it? What else? Okay, my farm. I don't plough my fields anymore, and I don't get fertilizer for my land anymore, right? And I don't use pesticides. I've got bees, right? So I can't have pesticides, obviously, okay? And I rotate my animals around my fields so that I never need to do that ever again, right? But the key is not to have too many animals on your fields, and then it is sustainable then as well, okay? And I don't have the slurry tanks and everything else, right? I don't need it. They poo in the field. It's what they're made for do, right? It's fantastic, okay? Right, and a week last Thursday, I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning, okay, and I ordered myself a Tesla Cybertruck. Okay, I tell you now, right, if you're a farmer, it's a no-brainer, okay, it's electric, does 300 miles to a charge, it's a pickup truck, you can offset it against your farm, your losses, okay, and it does 300 miles, okay. But one last thing, I would like to say, it's nice to hear that Simon says he's regretted some of his votes he's done in Parliament, and possibly I'd like to hear him say he's sorry as well, because 15 votes he's voted against the environment in Parliament, okay? He's voted against the Green Revolution, voted against carbon capture, voted against carbon setting of industry, and voted to tax the renewable energy generated at homes, okay? And he voted against the Green Energy Bank as well.
Hold up there, we'll come back to Alison 1 second.
I hoped that we could sort of not engage in that kind of cheap shop, because actually that is, with great respect to Reece, is not in fact true. What he is taking the statistics from is a very sort of wide-ranging element of votes, where I may well have voted against a Plaid Cymru amendment to another piece of legislation. I may well have done that. But that didn't mean I voted against those things, and that rather started up. So if we're going to be taken seriously, any of us candidates, government, local or national, let's please deal in the truth. It is essential we deal in the truth. That's all I'm going to say on that.
We have over an hour of discussion to go, so let's just get the foundations in place. We'll just, I'd like to Alice have a chance to his speech first, and then we'll come back.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the question was what, what are we personally going to do to reduce our carbon footprint? I suppose the first thing is I've got a very big decision to make in the immediate future because my car has done about 130,000 miles. It's a petrol car, which I'm going to need to replace it fairly soon, I'll be honest. So obviously my decision is whether I go for an electric car or not, and it's something I'm seriously thinking about, obviously. It's a massive decision. Other personal things, I do actually eat less meat than I used to. Perhaps I shouldn't have said this at the Farmers Union meeting we all went to on Monday. But I do eat less meat than I used to. Partly, I'll be honest, for health reasons as well. I think it's quite good for your diet. My house is quite insulated, believe me. It has been quite insulated. I try to travel by train a lot as much as I can, and not just because of the environmental reasons. It's actually quite relaxing and pleasant, isn't it? Sitting in a train rather than being stuck in a traffic jam on the M4. But I do all those things. Before I became more involved in Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire, I was involved in an organisation called Transition Cleve, in Bishop's Cleve in Gloucestershire, which is very much about reducing your carbon footprint, really, educating people, encouraging people. We had really good programmes there where we went around houses, advised people on how they could insulate their homes. Really effective movement that existed in Wales as well as England. And it was also good actually to get the community together in the schemes that we had going.
What is your vision for farming and food production over the next few decades?
Because as a general picture, what's your vision? Thank you very much.
Okay. I was at the Hustings on Monday. Can you all hear? Yeah?
Yeah.
Which was hosted by Farmers Union of Wales. And you all stressed that Welsh farming, particularly in this area, is sustainable. Now, if that is the case, in view of the challenge posed by climate change and so on, what specific changes would have to be made in practice by Welsh farmers? Because I'm sure many people, we all know very well, that your practice in your farm may be sustainable, but it's not the kind of farming practice that I see around me. And so what changes would farmers have to make for farming to actually be sustainable?
Great, thank you both very much. So the first part of the question, what's the big picture, what's your vision for the future of farming? And then very specifically, what are the recommendations that you'd like to make it sustainable for the long term? Very much.
Any farmers in the audience? That's what we just want to know. Yes, good. I mean, we've committed in our manifesto to make food production sustainable by 2040 in terms of carbon production. I think it's really important that we look at reducing carbon in every aspect of our industry in this country. We have to do it in terms of making sure that we are fulfilling our carbon targets and that we are setting a good example for other people as well. I think the point about the issue with sustainability at the event the other night was more about the fact that we have the opportunity to be sustainable in food production if we do it well because of where we are situated in terms of climate and geography and all the rest of it. I am weary of a move to industrialisation in our farming techniques. The constant planning applications, particularly in Powys, not so much in this area, but for huge dairy farms, I think it should be a worry to all of us. It is not natural. We can see the way that the dairy industry has gone in the United States of America. In that environment, it's not a natural environment for our animals to live. It's an environment where there is a huge reliance on antibiotics in the food chain system, and thankfully, being part of the European Union, we don't have to rely on that sort of mechanism for producing good quality food, because that's what we should be able to do really, really well in Wales, is produce high quality, good, nutritious food for our population, and it's something that we have to focus on, particularly if we do end up having a post-Brexit economy, because we are going to be on our own trading with the rest of the world instead of trading with our friends in the terms and conditions that we are accustomed to at the moment. And I think that's about environmentalists, and it's about the farming community coming together to make that work, and it's about how we use our land to the best effects in order to prepare us for the future. Now, there's been some discussion about rewilding, particularly at the hustings on Monday evening, and a huge resistance to any form of using land for tree planting, which I was a little surprised at, because I do think that we all have to work together in terms of how we move forward, and there are opportunities for everybody if we work together and plan for the future in terms of that. Just in terms of what changes would I like Welsh farmers to make? Well, I think looking at good provenance with our food, I think there is already an understanding that once we get that Welsh product mark, consumers understand that it's a good produce. We need to be more encouraging of people shopping local, using Welsh produce and being proud of eating Welsh food, so that we can use that produce across public sector procurement and across private industry as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fantastic question. We've got to go away from the fact that bigger is better. That is not the answer. We shouldn't go down the commercialisation route. But to a point, the farmers have been forced down that route. My father's farm, he always used to have about 90 cows. He's got 350 cows on the farm now. They're having to do it because of the quotas and the milk, 25 to 26 pence a litre, water, it's a ridiculous price, But that's modified by having grants. Now, the Scandinavian countries have gone back towards that, having the smaller farms. And then obviously if you've got the smaller farms, you will get natural biodiversity built into that. Now, you lose the biodiversity by having the cows on the fields, or worse, the machinery taking away the hay, and then fertiliser and slurry put on it as often as they can. That's when you lose the biodiversity. If you take away the high nitrogen fertiliser, biodiversity actually comes back, and I've seen that on my farm as well. Mind you, I have to top now, okay, but I much prefer doing that myself, okay? So reduction in fertiliser is definitely slurry, the new NVZ rules regards water quality and stuff. Now then, Welsh Government's coming into saying that slurry has to be put out at certain times of the calendar. That is going to be a complete disaster, okay? Because you can't farm to the calendar. And what will happen then is everybody, all of a sudden, won't be able to take our slurry for 6 months, and obviously, after that 6 month period is up, they're going to be throwing slurry everywhere, and we're going to be drowning in poo. Right? Right. The other key thing is local produce has to be eaten locally, right? And it has to be processed locally as well, and that's what we really suffer in Wales, okay? Because at the moment, you might be having something produced in Pembrokeshire, but it has to go to London to be packaged and then be brought back again. That is nuts, okay? Now, our local authorities should be forced to buy local food locally, right? And you won't need the packaging, and you won't need to be processed and all that stuff. That's what should be happening anyway. It's a no-brainer, but it's something that we have to work through local government to get those processes put in place.
Last point.
Post-Brexit economy. Right, okay. I have said this before, they're going to hate me for saying this again, right? But the only truth that's come out of Westminster in the last 6 months is that Boris Johnson is Thatcher on steroids, okay? Thatcher got rid of the miners, Boris Johnson could well get rid of farmers, right? And that's not the answer as well. I know we could import food cheaper from abroad, but that's not good for the environment, and it's certainly not going to be good for the carbon, okay? So the answer is produce food locally, eat it locally.
Thank you very much.
The problem with all of this is that worldwide we're seeing a rise. Excuse me. we're seeing a rising demand for meat, aren't we? As countries, we're quite across a prosperous country in Britain, but as other countries develop, standards rise, standards of living rise, obviously there's a rising demand for meat. And the problem is, you can understand why that's happening, but that is going to be extremely damaging for tackling climate change. There's no doubt about that. So somehow we've got to address that problem. Now, I do feel that certainly Welsh farming could be part of the solution to that problem. Because obviously the advantage is if you have food that's locally produced and then distributed and eaten locally, that is surely a lot better than food being transported halfway across the world, which is what is happening at the moment. But in order for Welsh farming to do that, obviously we want to see a heightening standard really in Welsh farming. And I'm particularly thinking of the way farming subsidies operate currently at the moment within the European Union. If we leave the EU, then that the subsidies will be determined locally, probably even by the Welsh government. But what those subsidies need to be aimed at is not just improving production all the time. I mean, we want to be sustainable as much as we can, but it's also got to be promoting environmental objectives. And so the subsidy rules need to promote all of them, whether that's replanting, whether it is encouraging grasslands, because obviously grass for cows, it all absorbs carbon dioxide, and that has got to be the way forward. I am certainly very wary of these trade deals that we might end up striking if we leave the EU. I mean, if we have a trade deal with America, that will certainly lead to much worse food standards. I think we all recognise that, and that is certainly not the way. So let's just stay in the European Union, have a and where we have the advantages of being within a much more local market. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just address the original part of the question, which was the vision. I suspect a lot of people in this room would have a natural tendency to believe that it's a combination of effective and sustainable food production coupled with an expanding sort of biodiversity program. I think that's what most farmers that I know are proud of being able to achieve. One of the reasons, not the only reason by a long way, one of the reasons that quite a lot of farmers opted to vote to leave the European Union, whether they still would is a different matter, but one of the reasons they did was because of the CAP. And the fact that the CAP was applying a sort of rather distorted pressure on agriculture, which resulted in overproduction of, one could argue overproduction of food, or indeed almost an over-reliance on environmental activity. So the balance wasn't right. That's what I'm trying to say. The balance wasn't right. The other reason about deregulation was Brexit going to produce a deregulated farming industry in which UK agriculture could operate to a different level of standards to the rest of the European Union. That myth was dispelled very early on, and I think whatever might happen, and I was just right about this, whatever might happen about Brexit, the fact is that we are going to have to be producing our food and producing any agricultural product and managing our land to the same standards that we are now, irrespective of whether we are in or out of the European Union. And I think that is quite crucial. Because otherwise the already delicate markets we're talking, export markets we're talking about, will be in jeopardy. So that's, I think, where we are on that. The question of rewilding, I know sometimes it's quite, I've been, ever since Reece alerted us to what was going on in the Archers the other day, I've actually been listening. And I think the rewilding thing is a real danger. I mean, I love the concept, but if what it actually ends up doing is reducing our ability to produce the amount of affordable and good quality food, or indeed it just creates greater food miles, then rewilding will actually be having the opposite effect of that which we would wish it to have. Full stop.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. So, coming back, you asked for vision and practical changes. Are you excited by the vision that you've heard? So get the microphone to you and then we'll come back to you to respond to changes.
I think it's got to be a lot more than just keeping up the standards that we have already. I think there is huge room for improvement in agriculture. Food is so important to us. It shouldn't just be cheap, it should be nutritious, it should be sustainable. And I think also that money has to be put into the environment agencies so that they can tackle the problems. For instance, the water pollution, the Tav is almost dead. Anglers have told us there aren't the fish there that there used to be. And this is because money has been taken away, we don't have water bailiffs anymore, etc. This is just one small example. There are lots of things that can be done.
Thank you very much. Just a short time, Pete. In the middle, okay, it's not often that you get jokes about sustainability. And when people don't understand it, there's this lovely joke to tell them. To two planets walking in space, one of them says, how are you feeling? Not very well, said the other one. What's the problem? I've got Homo sapiens. And the other planet says, oh, don't worry, I had it once. When you talk about these interdependencies, it's really important to understand those kind of key relationships. But anyway.
Okay. What plans do your party have to cater for and support the millions of climate refugees who will be and already are being displaced by the climate and ecological crisis? And then the other one was, as the UK is deeply culpable in the cause of the climate and ecological crisis and is a strong economic power, what will your party be doing to increase support of the countries on the front line of the emergency?
Does the UK have a moral responsibility to support developing countries in taking a less environmentally damaging route than we have, and what would be the best way of doing so?
I remember in Sanders, actually, one of the first things we've set an impossible challenge. Right? How do you stop 10,000 people walking towards your barrier and they've got nothing, and you've got water the other side of it? You know, how do you stop them? You know, and there isn't an answer because, you know, one or two wise guys thought, oh, I'll put up machine gun posts and mow them all down. No, you're not going to do that, are you? But that's actually what we're facing in the near future. Because we are going to face it, I think, now, because we've already gone past 1 degree centigrade rise in the last 10 years. Yeah, funny enough, the evidence was right, you know. Despite what Trump says, the evidence was correct. Actually, it's been proved the evidence was 95% correct. Right. Now then, the worrying thing is, what I've heard now is that we're going to have 3.5 degrees rise by 2050. Now we're hearing tonight about some of the changes for the environmental economy is not going to have any changes to 2045 for the Liberal Democrats, or is it 2050 for the Conservatives? You know, this is all too late. We've got to do it now because we are just about to set in train a chain reaction which is unstoppable. You know, we're talking about the melting of the permafrost and everything else. Once that happens, you're on an even more rapid acceleration of global temperature. And then, yes, we are going to have water wars, right? And we're going to have famine and food wars coming. And we are going to have tens of thousands of people marching, walking to wherever there is water. And it's not going to be stoppable. Right? And I don't think any army in the world would set up machine gun posts and everything else and just mow them down. It's going to happen. So we've got to do something now, right? As leaders, right? And we always say Britain is a leader in the world. Well, we've got to show our leadership now, right? Not be laggards in the world, like America has gone now, okay? And we have gone now supporting the fossil fuel lobby, right? We've got to be leaders in the field, okay? And that's why Adam Price's green energy revolution comes into it, okay? We've got to show ambition, right? Because we've got to make that leap of faith and do something good about it. But actually, if we did do that, I'd be able to sleep better at night. Yeah? But we're going to have to make changes. Every one of us is going to have to make changes. Whether not buying anything because it's covered in plastic, okay? Deciding not to take the car and walking instead, okay? All these things, we've got to think of ourselves first and then do those changes. And they're going to be difficult, but we've got to do it. If New Zealand is saying they're going to do it, right, we can do it. And the politics of New Zealand is fascinating as well. Look at the politics of New Zealand.
Thank you very much. Refugees, responsibility, and moral responsibility and practical action. 3 questions there.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, I'm just going to deal with the overall question of UK aid, and I'll come to the refugees perhaps at the end. The UK aid at the moment, what the current government in it was came with the coalition government of Liberal Democrats and Conservatives was that 0.7%, I think it was, of GDP would be provided for aid for people. Incidentally, that was higher than the Labour government before. I think it was between 0.3% and 0.4%. And I think certainly we must keep that up as an absolute minimum, continue to provide that aid. And I think also that aid must be directed at dealing with poverty, above all, not any other things. You know, sometimes the aid is not spent in the best way. It must be purely at poverty and helping to deal with that. Now, the conference in Madrid at the moment, the big division in that conference is between the rich countries and the poor countries. And obviously, the poorer countries, understandably, are aspiring to the same living standards that we all enjoy, you know, in Britain and other countries. And they want growth to achieve that, obviously. The trouble is, of course, that is going to affect the global warming and add to the climate emergency. And so we need to have some fair agreement in which the richer countries, such as ourselves, will support the poorer countries to raise their standards of living in an environmentally sustainable way. I think that's got to be the only answer to that. For instance, through the richer countries funding renewable energy in the developing countries. Now, I think President Macron of France, he was somebody who suggested that when we had the crisis in the Amazon, where there's a lot of damage being done to the Amazon, and he suggested that a rich country like France, in return for people not destroying all the trees and everything in the Amazon, that France and the rest of the European Union would provide financial support to enable Brazil and people who live in desperate poverty in Brazil to develop their country without damaging the climate. And that has got to be the way forward. And the only way these two things are going to be achieved are through countries working together. And just very briefly on the question of refugees, we've all got an international responsibility to help people. Ideally, people, I think, would love to stay in their homes and in their own countries, but obviously if people need to leave those countries, developed countries as ourselves, we need to send people into this country, and we need to work collaboratively with other countries to help deal with this crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think the question about the moral obligation and the refugees is quite overlapping, and I absolutely think that we have a moral obligation to maintain the 0.7% that Alistair refers to. That was actually enshrined in law by the Clegg Cameron government. I can't remember the exact number. I remember it being, and everybody in the room remembers too, that was not an uncontroversial measure. There was significant public backlash around that being set and said, why was it arbitrary? Why 0.7? Why not 1.1 or 0.5 or whatever the figure might have been? And I think the problem behind that was, as has been pointed out, it wasn't absolutely clear what that 0.7% was actually for. And there were too many examples of where some of it was going to projects or proposals which didn't appear on the face of it to necessarily either enhance the economy of the country to which that money was being devoted, or to lift or to help or to start the process of lifting people out of poverty in that area. So I think this was a vote for which I will not apologise, because I was very much in favour of it. I think that we are absolutely obliged to not just say, right, we've done that, it's 0.7%, forget it. Because I think if what was lying behind your question was the likely changing circumstances arising out of climate change in the years to come, that will probably put pressure on governments across the world to increase their foreign aid contributions in order to address that. Now, I also believe, because my nephew's been very closely involved with Syrian refugees, different cause of a significant refugee issue, he always reminds me, quite rightly, that the first objective in helping a refugee situation is to try and improve the situation in the country in which the problem is originating. The idea that actually the solution lies to we will take a community from the country they're in and plant them in another country on the basis that will solve the problem doesn't actually make sense, because it doesn't actually address the core issues which are in the country of origin and to which the refugee movement wishes to return. So I do think we need to be careful about that. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to finish with saying that I think that there are some, the point that Reece made about setting an example, I think this country, other European countries, big native developed nations, need to be absolutely out there making sure that the objectives that we set are practical and reasonable and that we achieve them, rather than we just come up with a mad figure and miss it. Because that way, I think we will be able to demonstrate our seriousness.
Thank you very much. Mark, thank you.
Yes, I just want to say what a thoughtful set of questions there, because I think it's something that we do have to consider as a nation which may not be as badly affected by climate change as some of the countries in the global south, which are already starting to experience horrifically devastating hurricanes, regular flooding, and of course all the illness and disease that goes along with that. Absolutely devastating conditions in part of the world, and I think sometimes we can be quite comfortable in our own position when we only have to deal with some of these things on a very irregular basis. But the whole issue around refugees has been a difficult subject for us to talk about in this country because of the way that they've been demonised, certainly by some of the press and certainly by some political parties. And we only have to look at what's continuing to happen as a result of the situation in Libya and across the Mediterranean, where people are literally fleeing for their lives, and the way that they are being treated by European Union and some of the far-right movements across the European area. It's something that we have to tackle, and it's something that Britain has to lead in terms of its role and responsibility. And I am actually very proud of our manifesto, and I clutch it and bring it to as many places as I can go, because there is quite a detailed section on all of these issues within the manifesto, particularly looking at climate change. The Labour Party has always been a movement of international socialist responsibility, and as we head into a climate crisis, as we are heading into, that is reflected in our manifesto. And we're talking about providing up to £4 billion a year in order to support other nations, with an international compensation scheme for those nations already suffering damage. We as a nation, as a developed nation, as a rich country that grew up on the back of an industrial revolution that caused a great deal of pollution in our global atmosphere anyway, has an absolute responsibility to assist nations in order to tackle the problems that they are now facing as a result of our previous mistakes. The UK Labour government would also end fossil fuel support in other nations as well. So we start removing the investment from old energy sources and looking at how we can invest into brand new technology, because that is where the future for our own country and for the developing nations will stand. And of course we do have a moral responsibility, of course we do. We need to help these countries in order to look after themselves, and we need to provide the adequate support and skills wherever we can in order to make their futures brighter as well.
Thank you very much. So I'll come back to reflect on the extent to which you've dealt with questions or answers and how happy you are with those.
Okay, well, I would say I didn't feel very satisfied with hearing what your parties are planning to do apart from the Labour Party. I got a clearer picture there. And I also asked for what would you be doing to increase support, because we're now all recognise that we're in a climate and ecological emergency, and that emergency calls for an increase in that support, not just a maintaining of it. And in response, Simon, to about the refugee situation, I completely agree. If we can create a situation where refugees can stay in their home countries, great. But I would recommend that the Conservatives bring their date for carbon neutrality a lot further forward if we can, because what is forcing people to leave is the climate crisis.
Yes, I didn't feel, Rhys, that you really addressed the question. Thank you, Alistair. I think I was more in harmony with some of what you were saying. And I have looked at the areas of the Labour manifesto, and I think there's a lot there, if it gets put into practice, that could be useful.
Thank you.
Instead of wasting £2 billion on no-deal preparations, should the government have invested £1.5 billion on the Swansea barrage?
The second question on the topic of energy was Why were the Tories all for fracking until an election was called? And I think it's back to Alistair. Over to you, start.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very quick, easy answer to the first one. The Swansea Lagoon Barrel. Yes, I absolutely support that. We should be spending the money on that rather than wasting on all this pointless expenditure on Brexit, which should never happen in the first place. And what's more, once you've developed the Swansea Barrel, you can apply the technology elsewhere. You perhaps apply it further down the Bristol Channel towards Newport, Cardiff, other parts of Wales and other parts of the UK. So it's, we're investing for the future there, aren't we? So we very much should be doing that. On the question of fracking, yes, I mean, I'll ask Simon to cover the Conservatives. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats, we oppose fracking. Various reasons. I mean, just on the gas, I mean, what this country has managed to do, and it's not brilliant, but it has reduced its carbon dioxide emissions to some extent by moving away from coal towards gas, because gas creates about half the carbon dioxide that coal achieves. But having said that, gas also is contributing to global warming, there's no doubt about that, and we've now got to move away from that and really go into renewable power, which obviously doesn't create any carbon, or hardly any carbon dioxide, except possibly in the manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon.
Thank you, Trevor. I've got some sympathy on the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. As I said earlier on, I've been instrumental in its support right from the outset. I was disappointed when, I think it was Greg Clark, rejected the proposal on the basis of cost, because the cost comparison with offshore wind had, in his opinion, become not a value for money for the taxpayer. I think that overlooked the sort of the recreational benefits as well as the research and development benefits, which others have talked about, and the sort of the pioneer nature of the project had it gone ahead and spread its way around the UK. I think that was a missed trick, and I understand that in the end it was a financial decision. Of course, UK Gov and others are not against Tidal Lagoon power, they were just against the bid that the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon company came up with, and which, because I was in conversation with them the day before yesterday, I think, they are revising the way in which they're putting the financial package together. I know we may have missed a year on that, but I think that is actually the notion of the project has not gone away. On fracking, I sort of feel I can't win. We were criticised when we were in favour of it, now we're being criticised by the same people, now we're against it. I do agree. I would have thought people would have welcomed the fact that actually we have listened to the arguments and reacted accordingly. So, rejoice, in the moments when the party of government has actually listened to concerns, read the evidence, changed its mind, actually, that should be good. I would like to think we could celebrate that.
Thank you very much. Mark.
Well, the Swansea Bay Tidal is a massively missed opportunity, not just for Swansea Bay, but for right across the South Wales coastline, and particularly in Pembrokeshire as well. There are 6 local companies dotted around Wilford Haven Waterway that would have directly benefited from the go-ahead for the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, and I'm pleased to see that it is in the Welsh Labour manifesto for this general election on December the 12th, because it has to have the go-ahead. Because not only will it just spark a green industrial revolution in itself, it will also create spin-offs right across South West Wales, which will only be good for the rest of us. In terms of fracking, we have had a moratorium on fracking in Wales. It is something that will not go ahead in this area, and under a UK Labour government it will be banned permanently across the United Kingdom as well. There have been too many scares in Blackpool and the surrounding areas in Lancashire where that test drilling has been undertaken over the last few months. I know that my Labour colleague up in that area has been very concerned about the seismic activity that's caused all of that testing to have to be stopped repeatedly. It is dangerous, we do not need it. We've seen exactly what happens with fracking and the effects on the environment and the effects on the watercourses in the United States of America. We do not need to be focusing on fracking in this country.
The Swansea Bay tidal lagoon was a no-brainer. It was a technology advancement. We would have been leaders in the world in tidal lagoon technology, and that would have started 3 or 4 other tidal lagoons starting in Wales as well, right? But to be honest, and that was in Cameron's manifesto in 2015, where he talked about this before, with the other Hustings, right? Okay, but to blame it on a private company then, surely that is a disaster. This should have been pushed forward by government, and not just blame it on a little private company. Okay, but also the blame lies in Cardiff as well. Okay, inward investment in Wales is down 40%. Okay, in Scotland, with an SNP government there, inward investment is up 2.5%. Right, and Scotland have banned fracking unilaterally. Okay. Cardiff Labour government have not banned fracking unilaterally. It's come from the moratorium from the Tories in Westminster, and that is wrong. Again, we're promising the world, but delivering nothing. No.
Well, really just that with a minority government, surely people like Simon and Stephen Crabb have had the power to vote it through, not just to blame the government. They are the government. The Swansea barrage I'm talking about.
They're blaming the private company, but you know, it's not.
But are you going to vote for it, Simon?
It's just an excuse.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Well, sorry, I don't understand why you didn't push. You're the government, you're in charge, you're in power. Why didn't you push the barrage?
Well, that's not actually strictly right. We both did push the barrage. Unfortunately, the government decision taken by Greg Clark, Secretary of State at the time, was that it wasn't value for money for the taxpayer. Now, you and I might disagree about that. Lots of people in the room disagree. I happen to disagree about that. There wasn't a vote on it because it was...
Could you not put a vote on it?
But listen, as I said to you before, I think that the idea that tidal lagoon power is a good thing is not disputed. But it was argued at the time by Greg Clark, and I'm not trying to put the blame, I disagree with it, but it was argued at the time it did not offer comparable value for money than other renewable schemes at the time, and that's why the company in question was sent back to try and revise the figures, and so that actually there was something which was comparable with other renewable projects, and it was deemed. And somebody somewhere always has to make a judgment. This is why, in the old cliche, government is about making unpopular decisions. I'm afraid it is. And the view it came to, with some reluctance, took about 8 months to get to this position. The view it came to was it could not justify the contract for different CFD, I think it was, because during the period of time, the cost of offshore had come down so dramatically, and the government's view was that was where the taxpayers' money ought to be better spent. I don't happen, in the end, that was somebody has to make a decision. They took a decision. I happen to disagree with it. I think it will come round again, and I don't think the deal.
Okay, super briefly, Reece, and then we'll take the next question.
This is exactly why Westminster does not work for Wales. You know, decisions about Wales should be made in Wales. Right? This happened in 1965 in Drewerin, and unfortunately, a village was drowned because of that. And even with all 40 MPs in Wales voting against it, it was run over. Okay, and that's the problem with Westminster. Right? We should have a veto about Welsh things, right? And we don't. Can I just to say on that, Welsh government did put money on the table in terms of the tidal lagoon. They put £200 million on the table to see that go forward, and it was still a decision by the UK government to not make that happen, despite all of the money that we're paying for a Chinese company to run Hinkley C. It might not have been, cheap enough to set up the system on the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, but we are all paying through the nose for a nuclear power station on the other side of the Bristol Channel, and we will be paying a foreign power for years to come after it's no longer used so either.
Good, so from paying through the nose, something to keep you on your toes. You have a question. So it's a question about applying common sense. And so, Janie, you have a question about transport.
According to the Department of Transport figures, driving at 70 miles per hour uses up to 9% more fuel than at 60 miles per hour. Would you agree that reducing motorway speed limits to 60 miles per hour would produce a relatively quick way to cut down on CO2 emissions?
I think that's what they used to say in Yes Minister was a bold proposal. Most of the pressure, funny enough, coming from the public is to increase speed limits from 70 to 80.
Well, they're not bothered about the environment of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a really interesting matter. If you want an honest answer, I think it is highly unlikely that is going to happen because there would be, maybe all the wrong reasons, significant public opposition to that. So that would be my honest assessment of the likelihood of that happening.
Okay, thank you very much. Mark?
Yeah, well, you know, it may be difficult, but sometimes life is difficult, isn't it? And we're going to have to make some difficult choices about how we want our future to look. Now, in Wales, we've already taken the decision on parts of the M4 to reduce the speed limit to 50 miles an hour because levels of air pollution through Port Talbot and parts of Swansea have been so high that they have exceeded limits. And the one thing that we know, particularly in lots of places in England, is that air pollution is exceeding safe levels. It is causing 40,000 premature deaths every single year. And the one thing that the Conservative government have managed to achieve in Westminster is suppress this report about that as well. So the issue here is that we have to look clearly at what the scientific facts are telling us and to make some very simple steps in order to make the future cleaner, safer and greener for everybody. And we are already leading the way. And 50 miles an hour coming out of Swansea and heading over to Port Talbot is no great hardship really, is it? It's a couple of extra minutes on your journey, but it is protecting lives in that community. And I think that's absolutely what we have to do in order to make some real change happen for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. That's a brilliant suggestion. I totally agree with it. I go further. Walk. Get on your bike. Get in the train. Oh no, all the trains use diesel in Wales because we're the only country outside Moldova that still uses diesel trains. Why aren't the trains electrified in Wales? Because we don't get the investment. Okay? But despite having 11% of the train infrastructure in UK, okay, we only get 6% of the investment, okay? But we're saddled with the whole debt for the whole of the UK, which is including the 56 billion for HS2 for London. Now, do we think that is fair? No, it is not fair. We want our fair share for Wales.
I mean, on the question of 70 miles per hour, I mean, obviously it's not in our manifesto, probably not in any of the party manifestos, I imagine. But I personally feel quite sympathetic to that. I think that is a good idea. It will obviously reduce CO2 and pollution, but actually make it safer as well for people on the motorways. I mean, you know, there are lots of people killed on the motorway, so I feel very sympathetic and think it would be a good idea. And I was in Germany in the summer, where there is, I believe, no limit whatsoever on the Autobahn, and it's absolutely petrifying there to see the speed of the vehicles going along there. And a lot of people in Germany say, well, this is the influence that the automotive industry has on Germany, and I think that is very much the case, really, which is a great shame. So I feel very sympathetic to reducing the speed limit on motorways. The question of air pollution was raised as well during this, and there's no doubt that air pollution is a killer to people. It's a major killer for people in the cities. It really is a serious problem. And what we would introduce in the Liberal Democrats is a Nature Act, which would have legal targets for reductions and improvements in the quality of air, but also actually in water, soil, biodiversity, all of those things. Because we do need to have a much safer, much better standards of air. And just one final thing, I think we had mention of cycling as well. In the Liberal Democrat manifesto, our target is that 10% of the transport budget, and this is UK obviously, it has to be adapted for Wales, 10% of that would be to promote cycling, cycle lanes and getting people using their bikes much more.
Thank you very much. So to respond.
Can I just say, sorry. Can I just say that you can call me very cynical, but we all know, well, most of us in this room know that we have a climate emergency. And unfortunately, when I asked the question, I actually heard a murmur of people thinking it wasn't a very good idea. But unless we actually do something, right,
we are not really going to come to terms with it. If we leave people to make their own decisions, how many people are actually going to make the decisions that have to be made to any degree, basically? And I do think that something as simple as that, because I'm sure it can be done very, very quickly, and it would have to be enforced, and all these people with their super fast cars aren't going to like it, but at the end of the day, it's something very practical, which will be very unpopular probably, but it would actually say we are actually very concerned and this is what we are going to do to prove our concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How is your party going to use citizens' assemblies to address major issues facing us that transcend party politics, most notably the climate and ecological emergency? And will the decisions be made mandatory?
Where do you and your party stand on recognising ecocide as law in the International Criminal Court? And ecocide is summarised as the extensive damage on the environment caused by human activity. I can read the full definition if you want. No?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mark.
Yeah. Well, certainly I think to take the second part first. Sorry, I was so busy reading I didn't see who asked the question. There we go, thank you. Certainly the Labour Party in its manifesto is looking at strengthening. We can work with other nations to strengthen international law, particularly around environmental destruction. You know, it breaks my heart to be watching videos on the internet from Borneo and other places where, you know, we just see the devastation being caused through the rainforest, you know, the natural habitat of, you know, these orangutans being just completely exploited for human greed, and actually knowing that, you know, yes, I can sign a petition here on the internet, but what international pressure can it actually bring to bear? And it's the same situation with Brazil and the right-wing president that they've got there, you know, tearing down the rainforest for, you know, beef plantations, essentially. You know, these are things that outrage all of us. We all get frustrated seeing these things happening, and actually we need some form of serious mechanism internationally to be able to cause a halt to some of these issues, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, which is the, you know, the lungs of the planet, essentially. We have to be able to have some international force to be able to prevent these problems from happening in the future. You know, if it was somebody stealing somebody else's oil, we'd be in there like a shot. And that would be the thing. And on the assemblies issue, it's certainly something that we are looking at in Wales. I know that Mark Drakeford, following his selection as the First Minister, is looking at it. It was something that Lynette Morgan had put forward as part of her manifesto to become First Minister as well, listening to people in their own communities. It works very successfully in Ireland, where they've managed to deal with some very contentious issues in terms of their own domestic policy, such as on legalisation of abortion and on gay marriage. And I think there is an absolute need for us to depoliticise some very important issues that face our country. The way we organise our health services is one of them that springs to mind in this particular part of the country as well, because, you know, these are decisions that should transcend political boundaries. These are issues about the people that affect this, that live in this local area. So I'm all for people's assemblies. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
I think I echo Mark there, to be honest with you. Assemblies is a relatively new thing to me, but I understand what they mean, and I think we do need to bring the experts back into the discussion. Everything now seems to be, you know, so it's all about populism, you know, and Trump and Googling something and getting the answer in the next 0.2 of a second, and then all of a sudden you're the world's expert in something. I think we've got to go away from that, start trusting the experts again and the professionals. And I think if citizens' assemblies can bring that into us for doing that, I think that would be an incredibly valuable thing. I echo what Mark said about politicians running certain organisations like the Health Service who effectively they don't have a clue how to run the health service. They're just there to make sure the budgets are tied and agreed, and so that is wrong. We should have somebody who understands it, and I believe now in clinical leadership. It shouldn't be chief executive who's in charge of hospital, it's the chief surgeon or chief physician who should be in charge of hospital, because they actually understand the business of health a lot better than the chief executive, and he's only there to sign the checks. It does scare me about what's happening in Brazil. You know, we are losing the lung of the world in Brazil, and effectively we are powerless because we haven't got any mechanism to bring those people to account. You know, just like we had a mechanism to bring mass murderers in war and everything else, and the Hague Convention after the Second World War. I think, you know, we should be starting to explore that as well, yeah? Because effectively they are murdering millions of people. It might not be happening now, but it certainly will be happening in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So yes, I agree with it. If they were brought to account, or if there was a law there to bring them account, and I think things like Brazil, Borneo and everything else would happen a lot less than it does at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'll first of all deal with the question of ecocide. I'll be honest, I've not seen it in our manifesto, but I do actually think that it should be dealt with as a criminal, dealt with as a crime in the international court. I mean, if somebody or an organisation does extensive damage to our environment, for instance, contributing to global warming, the global emergency, people will die as a result of it. We know that people are already dying in floods in different parts of the world, and so that is criminal to cause those people's deaths, and so it should be dealt with in international courts as a crime. So I feel very much with that. On the question of citizens' assemblies, they are in fact in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, and I very much support them. And I think, again, if we're dealing with big issues like the climate emergency, then the advantage of them is it takes it out of the hands of politicians. And we all know there are shortcomings in politicians of whatever party, including my own party, because you have party whips, and that takes away decisions. But if you can have people deciding without politics, on the basis of evidence, citizens deciding, that is surely a much better way to make decisions. And what's more, once they've decided on the basis of evidence, politicians then can't stop them and go against them. They won't have the power to do that. So I think it's very good. I was recently at an Extinction Rebellion meeting in Cardigan, where we saw the Citizens' Assembly in work, and it was very effective.
Thank you very much.
I think the thing about citizens' assemblies, which I think we want to guard against, is the moment they become democratically accountable and they have binding powers, they become politicians. That's what a politician is. And so if they're elected, well, if it's an elected body which the decisions of which become contractual. Have I got that wrong? Tell me why I'm wrong. I'm sorry if I got that incorrect.
It's like jury, so it's a completely representative of the country or the area that it is involved. So by default is not politicised.
Would they be elected? How would they?
No,
okay. Selected by who? Sorry, I'm not
just off the centre. So like from the letters get sent out.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I mean what I was going to say, I'm actually quite relaxed about the idea, but I think there is an accountability issue once the decisions that they reach become, if you like, binding or somehow contractual in law. Then I think there's an account. All I would say is I think there is an accountability question that I'm not completely clear about. But that doesn't mean I'm not actually reasonably relaxed. And actually, the whole process of devolution, which Reece might be surprised to hear, I'm again probably was a little bit resistant to back in 1997 where it was, and has in many respects been the start of a process which has been effective in taking decision making to a much more local level. I have no problem with that at all. On the question of ecocide, for me, I think the international agreements as such they are great across a number of different topic areas. I think the sanctions, which might or might not get imposed as a result of breaches of those international agreements, are to me where the problem possibly lies, because actually what sanctions are there at the moment when you're dealing with a huge economy such as Brazil? It's all very well having international agreements which people meet, 4 times a year to sign up on, but unless there is something meaningful which is more stick than carrot in the implementation of those or the enforcement of those international agreements, then I agree that they are fairly sterile pieces of paper. So, yeah. So I'm just not completely sure that the whole jigsaw is there, but I'm sort of warm.
Great. So, responding to what I've heard, great, thank you very much to the speakers. Coming back to you.
Yeah, encouraged to hear that the majority of you have taken on Citizens Assembly and are willing to allow a more democratic decision process. Simon, it would be great for you to find out a bit more about Citizens Assemblies.
I'm going to do that. Just one.
Annika side?
Similarly, I'd implore you to look into the work of Polly Higgins and Jojo Mehta on ecocide, making ecocide law in the criminal court. I think that if we do start to treat it like genocide, which it could be becoming equivalent to in the loss of life and the loss of biodiversity and other animals and species, then having that ruling in the International Criminal Court will stop corporations as well as, it'll be, I think it's the stick that we need.
If the Conservative government are returned with a majority next week, it's highly possible that we will leave the EU on no deal at the end of 2020. How will we be able to trade with the world, US, India, China, etc., and still tackle climate change?
Well, we won't. It's the quick answer to that, because we're going to be at a huge disadvantage. It's going to be a race to the bottom because of standards. Okay, so it's going to be trying to produce the cheapest type of food you can possibly have. Okay, so and you can, if you know, there's going to be a huge tidal wave of imports coming into this country, and we just won't be able to survive. What was the other thing you said? So basically, we won't is the first answer.
Yeah. Do you want to hear the question again?
Yeah. Well, it's the second part of the question.
Glasses again. I've got to put my glasses on again. How will we be able to trade with the world, as you know, we were saying we want to get out of the EU so we can trade with the rest of the world, but we do trade with the rest of the world at the moment. US, China, etc., and still tackle climate change.
Right, okay, so the second answer is with great difficulty, because then when we're trading with the rest of the world, we're a country of 70 million as opposed to America's 240 million, India's billion, and China. Don't even go there. So it's a scale of numbers. So we're going to be really up against it. So yeah, that's the answer.
Mark.
Certainly. I mean, if you vote Labour on the 12th of December, you've got less chance of leaving the No Deal. Labour has ruled out a No Deal leaving scenario because it's just not in our best interests at all. And in fact, you know, this week we've discovered that leaving the EU is not in our best interests in any shape or form. So, you know, the reality is that if you want a second referendum, a second shot at staying in Europe, voting Labour on the 12th of December, tactically or not, you know, is the reality there. And, you know, we will, if we do have to leave Europe, when it goes to a confirmatory vote, it will be a deal that will align us closely to the customs union and to the single market, so that if we do leave Europe, when we do leave, there will be no further discussion about a trade deal. And this is the problem with the Boris Johnson deal. There is no clear end in sight. This has the potential to go on and on and on. Now, looking at trading with the rest of the world and how we can tackle climate change, Labour has been absolutely clear in its manifesto. We will make environmental protection a plank, an absolute red line when it comes to trading with other nations around the world in future. That's absolutely important. If we're going to be serious about climate change, if we're going to deal with this climate emergency, we have to make it a red line in terms of how we progress trade deals in the future, and I'm proud that Labour has put that forward in its manifesto.
Thank you very much.
I disagree with the fundamental, as you'd expect me to, the fundamental premise of the question. I don't believe that it is either impossible or unlikely to reach a proper deal in the timescale of it. Will, as I've said at other hustings, at which you were present, I've said it won't be easy and it can't be guaranteed, but I do think that it is possible. And as some people in the room know, I voted Remain for a number of reasons, one of which was political uncertainty and upheaval, one of which was economic uncertainty and upheaval. But I did so on the proviso that I would honour the outcome, I would honour the votes of the people of the two counties that I represent, which was 54% roughly in Carmarthenshire, 57% roughly in Pembrokeshire. We could have a long argument, which I suspect we don't at the start at 9:15 now, about whether people were duped into making a decision that they subsequently regretted. I trust voters a bit better than that. And in terms of the question about trading with the world, I sympathise with. Actually, I'm quite in line with Mark's view on that, but I'm less in line with Reese's, because what I don't understand, if he's concerned that a country of 70 million won't be able to have the impact that it should in its well-being, Clyde's ambition to actually divorce itself from Britain and make itself a country of 4 million people strikes me as actually making that situation more challenging rather than more deliberate.
I'll let you come back at the end. I'll give you summary comments in a second. Alistair.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so the question was, if we leave the European Union, how will we trade with the world and at the same time tackle climate change? The answer to that has got to be extremely difficult. And I would just say that when the Liberal Democrats were in the coalition with the Conservatives, Ed Davey was the Liberal Democrat Energy Secretary at the time, and he was involved in negotiating within the European Union for much tougher controls on reducing climate change and reducing carbon dioxide emissions within the EU. And he was very successful in that, and he got much more stringent targets on reducing the CO2 within the EU. Now, you may not feel they were strong enough, you might well be right in that, but they were certainly an improvement on what the EU was going to do without Ed Davey's influence. And what's more, once the EU had these stronger CO2 reduction levels, it was then able to influence a lot of countries outside the EU and get them to go to the same tax standards. So it's an example of how the European Union can have a positive role in reducing global emissions. And of course, it's so ridiculous going out of the European Union because they're our geographic neighbours. They're the people we ought to be trading with most of all, rather than going to other parts of the world, which involves goods transporting halfway around the world, contributing to carbon dioxide emissions. It's absolutely stupid and nonsensical that what we're thinking of doing. And really to do a deal with somebody like Donald Trump of America, who doesn't believe in climate change in the first place, it's an absolute farce. It would be a joke, but it's not a joke. It's very serious.
Why has Pembrokeshire now got so many blue flag beaches when only 60 years ago the UK was called the dirty man of Europe?
We've been speaking of the climate emergency. The last emergency that the country had to deal with was the Second World War under a government of national unity. The country was mobilised, and in 1 year production increased 60%. Can we not mobilise that by having, if you were to get into government again, would you try to get a government of national unity to address the emergency?
Great, thank you very much. And I think a similar question, I think, from Greg.
You all seem to agree that climate change is a bigger problem than party politics. In what concrete way do you all plan to work together to do something about it?
Okay. First of all, on the question of the blue flag from Philip, my former maths teacher. Well, that's what I had to. Yes, indeed. Yeah. You're totally right. Britain was the dirty man of Europe. We had filthy beaches, we had filthy seas. The reason it changed was European Union regulations and the threat of legal action. Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire, we've got so many blue flags around our beaches, and you know, we're rightly very proud of that. On the question then of the Government of National Unity, I am rather sympathetic to that. I agree with you. I think that would be a really good thing, because we're in such a big crisis at the moment. I actually wish, rather than have this general election, we should have all of our political parties agreed and put forward Government of National Unity, led by somebody, not one of any of the current political leaders, I have to say that, but there are certain people in Parliament who everybody looks up to, we know that, who could have taken that leadership role. And it would have been much better. What we could have then done is had a people's vote, second referendum, call it what you like, on leaving the European Union. We could have had that debate, and then at the end of all of that, we could have had a general election when we've gone back to arguing over the normal things political parties argue about, which is healthy and a good thing. And that would have got us out of this dreadful crisis that we're all in. And I do recognise that. I realise people are finding this so difficult. Bit more optimistically, I mean, there was some working together, obviously, prior to to this general election on stopping a no-deal Brexit. I think that was very healthy. And I do actually think that governments of all political persuasions could work together on issues of climate change. At the end of the day, you've compared it to the Second World War. Yeah, you could well say it's a serious, you could even say it's more serious than that, because it's the whole of mankind, humanity. On these issues, and actually, I do actually have optimism in politicians of all political persuasions. I think when we are faced with crisis, we can actually do that, and we will work together, and as a country get back to where we were. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On the question of beaches, I would add to that, I think there's been some good work from institutions like NRW. I think there's been good work from the charitable sector. I think there's been good work from others as well who contributed to that outcome over a long period of time. I think one of the big mistakes made over the process of Brexit, which was pinpointed by Ken Clarke on the very first day, I think, after the referendum in 2016, which is that there should have been a cabinet of national unity at that stage to deal exclusively with Brexit. The rest of the cabinet would carry on doing the sort of day-to-day running of government. But actually, a trick was missed, and I think Ken Clarke was probably right about that. And how would I make a difference? Well, if I ended up in the very unlikely circumstances I ended up as Chief Whip in any future government, I think the way of breaking down the barriers would be to make climate-related legislation on a free vote. So there wouldn't be the pressure, the party pressure from whips to vote in a certain way. And if you remove that, actually you would get, I think, a more mature decision-making process, whoever was in office at the time.
Right, to touch on Pembrokeshire's beaches, Carmarthenshire's beaches, well, I would remember when I think Penbrae, Kevin Sheedan got its very first Blue Flag Award, and we were supposed to, in school, go along and be a part of the crowd cheering on this wonderful success back in the 1980s, and it poured rain, and the trip was cancelled. It didn't happen. But we're only there because of those tight EU standards, and we're only there because we've got a Welsh Government that makes it happen, and we're only there because we've got a not-for-profit water company here in Wales that it invests its profit into ensuring that the huge coastline of Wales is protected from flood and protected from sewage spill, and it's really important that we maintain that not-for-profit water company here in Wales, but that we roll them out across the rest of the United Kingdom as well. Yes, we are facing a climate emergency. Yes, there are still people in our communities who don't believe climate change is happening. We still have to be out there advocating to everybody that this is real, it's happening now, and if we don't make a serious change, it will be too late. We will work together, of course. We're already working together in the National Assembly for Wales to make our nation as green as it possibly can be. We were the first country in the United Kingdom to introduce the plastic bag charge. We are excelling in terms of recycling here in Wales. We are doing a fantastic job already, but we cannot stop. And, yes, this is a bigger picture than just party politics, and I think the consensus that we've reached in the room tonight has demonstrated that. Look, some media commentators are talking about this election as being the Brexit election. It's more than just the Brexit election. It's the end austerity election. It is the end Brexit election, and it is the end climate change election. These are the three big issues facing our country as we head into a brand new decade. That's what your vote on December the 12th will be about. Ending austerity, ending public service cuts, ending food bank increases that we've seen, ending universal credit, sorting out Brexit once and for all properly, and then looking at the climate emergency with a green industrial revolution that not only brings jobs into communities here in Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire, but creates a brand new skill set for people so that we have the sustainable jobs of the future. That is what you're voting for if you vote for Labour on December the 12th.
Yeah, reference to sewage, absolutely agree with you. I surf, and yeah, surfing 20 years ago was horrific. You're coming out covered in brown. Now, but to be honest with you, these days it's worse on another level now, because you take home bags of plastics with you as well. So yes, we've done something, but a huge amount more needs to be done, and that's why we do need to get rid of single-use plastics, and we've got to recycle all our plastics anyway. Reference government, yeah, I think politics needs to move with the times. It's not about red or blue, as I was saying. They keep trying to polarise politics so that actually you only vote for the far right or the far left. And it's not like that anymore. Right? It's a lot more nuanced. Okay? And I think until we change that, it's not going to change. Right? I do believe in local politics. The more local you can do it, the better. So if citizen assemblies can do that, that's even better than devolution. Okay? But if decisions in Wales should be made in Wales, but that's if citizen assemblies can do that, that's absolutely fantastic, and I support that. I also think that first past the post doesn't work as well. It's a lot more nuanced than that, right? It should be proportional representation, and if you did have that then, well then you could then have consensus party. You could have government of consensus agreement then, like New Zealand have had for the last 10 years. And they are incredibly forward-thinking, they're very progressive, and that's where we need to get to. But just like the rugby, we need to keep learning from New Zealand, I think. But I have to say, Plaid Cymru and everything else, our manifesto is incredibly progressive. We got an amazing leader at the moment, Adam Price. He's really, yeah, he is our Kennedy, I firmly believe that, and he will be the leader of Wales in the next few years. But if you do look and read the Green Manifesto we've got there, I really love it, and I actually think it's greener than the Green Party. So, ladies and gentlemen, an absolute honour speaking to you.
So the most important thanks for tonight are to you for coming and bringing your questions. Friday night hustings are always popular.
I appreciate that this is being brought about by the climate emergency. That's my #1 priority. But I've also heard a lot of talk during this debate about Brexit. Just keeps coming into everything. I think most people, I certainly fed up of hearing about Brexit. Why? So one question, quick one. Why do none of the politicians ever describe it for what it was, an advisory referendum, which the government have no obligation to deliver on? Not only do they not have an obligation to deliver on it, they don't even have a timescale obligation to set on it. Why is it not being called what it was, an advisory referendum?
We're on time, but I think that's a really important question that doesn't get asked enough, and I think is one that our representatives here need to take back.
Happy to answer, I'm sure.
Because it's a critical. Sorry?
Can I hear what they got to say on that?
I mean, I don't mind. If you'd like to hear that, yeah, we can take one more. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So the essence.
Quickly.
So that's fine. So the essence is, why don't you call it what it
bam,
was?
Bam, bam, bam. Why is it not called what it was?
Okay.
Well, I mean, look, to be honest with you, it was a mistake to have the referendum.
Expensive mistake, yeah.
Terribly expensive mistake. I can tell you what I understood happened. To be quite blunt, the Conservative were in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. The Conservatives assumed, they had pressure by UKIP, so they put forward the idea. They then assumed that they would be in coalition after the general election, and the Liberal Democrats would stop it, because that's what we would have done. But what happened? We got massacred in that general election, as I'm sure you know. So we had a majority Conservative thing. David Cameron was then stuck with it, and we went downhill from there. And that,
Hustings. I think Alison and I have not lost sort of a single thing, but I would just remind the room that a referendum on our future membership of the European Union was contained in the Liberal Democrat manifesto. So it's not completely accurate. My own view, David Cameron at the time, it was in our manifesto. We were elected on the back of that manifesto, which committed to a referendum. David Cameron, staunch Remainer, as you know, made it absolutely crystal clear throughout that period that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. There would be no time to regret it. And I think the fact that he spelt that out so clearly meant that if we had then, after the result came out, said, but sort of backed off and said, well, it was only an advisory because actually here, I think that would have been a huge act of disrespect for people who took Cameron at his word and voted in that referendum on the basis that it was something which was binding and which would be implemented. And I think that for me, much as I voted enthusiastically to Remain, the fact of the matter is, referendum, advisory or otherwise, if we do not respect the result, that is the greatest disrespect we can to show to voters of all of the things we've talked about in the democratic system.
Well, let's not forget that prior to the referendum, David Cameron traipsed around Europe trying to flog a dead horse, asking for all sorts of benefits to try and keep us away from having a referendum. And every single time he opened himself up to that negotiation, Europe said no, and his party said referendum. And that's the reality of how we ended up in this situation. It was a complete nonsense from the very beginning. He was trying to offer people something that didn't exist, and what we've experienced over the last 3.5 years is a parliament trying to enact the will of the people, which is not actually something that is that possible in the time frame that we have got, and certainly no outcome is ever going to be the outcome that people have in their own minds for what Brexit might be. Nothing was properly defined, nothing was set in stone, and that's why we have become what I think probably is one of the laughingstock countries of Europe over the on the international stage beyond all doubt, and it has put us in a much, much weaker position when we go into any form of negotiation or any form of deal with any other country in the future, because people look at us and think, what the hell is Britain doing?
Absolutely. Not only was it just an advisory referendum, but the one consistent thing throughout the last 6 months has been how much deceit and lies we've been told, right? Yes. Boris Johnson, in short time, has lied to his partner, has lied to Parliament, and even managed to lie to the Queen. It's quite amazing, really. He's managed to do that in such short space of time. But the other thing is, what is the type of democracy have we got in this country? It's parliamentary democracy is what we've got in this country. And why have we got parliamentary democracy in this country? Does anybody know what Churchill's comment was? Well, there's one comment I do believe Churchill, right? The biggest weakness about the democracy is the democracy, and that's why we've got parliamentary democracy. Now, Parliament has consistently tried to fight this, okay? Because it will harm us. They know it will harm us, and that's why they're fighting it. And that's why we have got parliamentary democracy. So we should let parliamentary democracy ride with this, and actually, if they can't do it, bring it back to the people and let us have a second referendum. Now that we're educated about Brexit.
Bringing a great question.
I got loads.
Great, so please, can I get a big final hand?
So we're getting candidates all over the country to take a climate pledge to deal breaking how I vote for the climate crisis. And I hope this says the same thing in Welsh.
I'll verify.
And my pledge is to be inclusive and consensus, but I think I'm afraid it's going to be 3 of you, so.
I'm just going to say, I've signed a lot of things in my time, and I've regretted every single one, because somewhere down the line there'll be a sentence which will either not suit you or it will be completed. And so I'm really sorry, and I know it'll make me even more unpopular than I already am, but I'm not going to fall into that trap, much as I